So Tekken has 4 main buttons: 1, 2, 3, and 4. These correspond to the limbs on your character, so if I was to hit the 1 button, I would get the left punch, 2 would be the right punch, 3 would be the left leg, and 4 would be the right leg. Some characters are a little odd, but most follow this trend. Here's a quick overview of the notation you may see online. The only real difference you'll find is that arrows are translated to letters to make it easier to type out. You may also see 1 plus 2, 1 plus 2 plus 4, 2 plus 3, and so on. All this means is to click those buttons at the same time. You may also see black arrows, which means to hold the directional input for a little bit longer, and you can also see star inputs, which means to release the directional input back to neutral. Tekken is a 3D fighter, meaning you can enter the background and foreground by tapping up and down respectively. To continue your movement along this direction, you can implement a double tap and then hold the last directional input to walk. You may also backdash with a double tap away from the opponent and begin a run towards the opponent with a double tap forwards. Defense in Tekken is a little bit weird, but if you played a game like Street Fighter, you will be familiar with the mechanic of holding backwards to block. Attacks can be categorized as high, mid, and low, with a very select few being special mid. High attacks can be blocked standing or evaded by ducking. These attacks are normally the quickest option and quite low risk. Mids must be blocked with a standing guard, as if you're crouching, they'll hit you. Mids are often quite strong, medium risk attacks to check if your opponent is ducking a lot. Lows must be guarded with a crouching guard. Alternatively, if you foresee your opponent utilizing one, you can use an advanced technique called a low parry. A low parry can be utilized by holding down forward during the enemy's low animation. Lows are often high risk, and if they're quick, they're normally quite weak, while stronger ones are very slow and normally quite reactable. Lastly, we have the more niche category, special mid. This is showcased as a green mid icon in practice mode, and you'll often see this attached to your crouching jabs. These can be blocked with either a standing guard or a crouching guard. Separately, we have a few unique attack properties. Homing moves are utilized to catch people stepping to either side of your character, which can be seen as having these white sparks around the attack. Screw attacks are moves which, when used on an airborne opponent, will spin them onto their back with their legs up. This allows you to extend your combos one more time. Power Crush attacks have an armoured component, allowing you to neglect all attacks except for lows during your startup. They are susceptible to being thrown, as you cannot break a grab during your Power Crush attack. A move called a Rage Art shares this Power Crush mechanic but does not have these downsides. You can be killed during your Power Crush attack, so it's not like you're invincible. You'll be able to identify when your opponent is using one, since they'll have a white aura. Lastly, we have unblockables. Unblockables are normally very slow yet powerful moves, which break your guard and deal the damage anyway. There's normally some kind of particle effect around the character when they're mid animation, and you'll be able to see an exclamation point during training when you're using one. You automatically enter Rage around 20% of your health points remaining, and in this state you deal slightly more damage and have access to your Rage abilities. Your Rage Art is an armoured move that, if landed, will showcase a cinematic attack dealing massive amounts of damage. Now, a Rage Drive is normally a powered up version of another move your character has. You can see when a character is using the Rage Drive since they have a big blue aura. Using either Rage ability will end your Rage state, removing your small damage buff. In Tekken, there are 6 universal stances your character can act out of, with one of them actually having 4 sub-stances that I'll talk about after. Some characters also actually have 1 or more extra stances unique to their own character. The first is known as your standing state. Where you stand still or move less than 3 steps in any direction, you'll be able to utilize all your standing moves. Secondly, we have your crouching state. where if you hold down or any downwards direction for a little bit, you'll enter the crouching state and be able to utilize these moves. Thirdly, we have your while standing state. This is confusingly labelled as while rising in the game's move list. This is when you are transitioning from your crouching stance to your standing stance, which can be done simply by letting go of your crouching direction and then hitting any input you want. The game lists these moves as while rising, but the notation of WR is dedicated to while running moves, so the community coined the term while standing, also known as WS. This leads us to our while running moves, where running more than 3 steps will allow you to utilize your character's while running moves. It can be quite deceiving to know when you've actually entered your while running stance, as even though your character may be running, they're technically not in the while running stance until they're 3 or more steps into your run. Alternatively, you may skip this build up by tapping forwards 3 times and then hitting the button you want. This is quite an advanced technique and will require a lot of practice. You can see what unique moves you can access out of your while running stance, as they will have 3 arrows and then the input you want. If you run 3 steps but less than 4, you'll automatically perform a tackle. You can click 1 and 2 over and over again to punch the opponent. They must guess what button you're pressing to get you off. Run 3 or more steps and then press 4 and you'll do a slide low kick and go to the other side of the opponent. If you run the maximum amount of steps, I think that's about 4 or over, you'll automatically perform a shoulder tackle, which gives you the power crush mechanic. Finally, and definitely the least, you have your jumping attacks. You can jump by holding the upwards direction for a little bit and then you'll have access to a few moves. As expected, being on the ground whilst your opponent is standing over you and free to act is never a position you want to be in, unless you're Lei. If you are knocked down, your opponent is now probably planning the Okizeme. Okizeme is a term used in Tekken for attacking a player who's either on the ground or trying to get up off the ground. If you have been hit up into the air and you land on the ground with your feet touching the floor, which is not the same as being hit by the first screw attack, as you can see your legs are a little bit up into the air, you can try and press a punch button to roll into the background, or a kick button to roll into the foreground. You are very safe during these rolling animations, and every time you get hit whilst on the ground, you can try and tech this with 1 or 2 and get up off the ground quickly. But say you miss the tech and now you're on the ground and in trouble. Holding back is a wonderful place to start. This is normally the safest option when you are face up and feet towards. There are technically 4 stances you can be whilst on the ground. This is normally face up, feet towards, as I said, but you can be face down, feet towards, or you can be face up, feet away, or face down, feet away. You may also tap up to get up in place, tap forwards to roll, which combined with a 1+2, you'll do a little slow tumble where you're plus on block. You can also press 4 for a mid kick, or 3 for a low kick. Both of these are unsafe, I think they're around -12. You can also use both kick buttons to do a spring attack, yet generally this is a bad idea. Speaking of bad ideas, if you hold down and then click 3 or 4, you'll do a toe attack. Now if you land this toe attack, you'll roll backwards, but if you don't, you won't roll at all and you'll be -15. Lastly, you can press up and 1 or down and 1 and you'll roll into the background or foreground respectively. It can be quite frustrating in Tekken because sometimes they label a stance very clearly and sometimes they don't. Consider someone like Lee. He has a very clearly labelled stance called Hitman stance. We know it's a stance because he gets new moves during it and he can't use any of his other moves. Then you have someone like Kazuya, who has a wave dash which is technically a stance because it opens up new moves and restricts other moves. It is not labelled as a stance though, so it can be very deceiving for newer players. On a quick side note, stance moves are normally quite powerful and beginner players can perceive them as very overpowered. The trick is when you identify someone in their stance, the pool of moves is dramatically restricted, so you only have to play around a handful of moves rather than the traditional vast moveset. In Tekken, everyone has access to generic throws, with a combination press of 1+3 or 2+4. You must be close to your opponent to do so, but you may extend the generic grab by holding forwards and then pressing the button combination. This will give you a little more reach. You may break either of these generic throws with a 1 or 2 press, but not both, during the beginning of your grapple animation. You may also duck all the generic throws and pretty much every other throw in the game except for a select few. Characters have different unique throws, with everyone having an alternative command throw which leads with both hands, requiring a 1+2 input to break. Other characters have special throws which look like generic throws but must be teched with a specific 1 or 2 input. You can identify these by recognizing the leading hand during the grab, where if they lead with the left hand, you press 1 to break, and if they lead with the right hand, you press 2 to break. Someone like King, who is a grappling specialist, can make it look like they're using a throw that would be broken with 1 input, only to have it require an alternative input. This is definitely the exception to the rule. It is important to note that if you click the wrong button during your grab, you get locked out of the other options, so you can't just mash every button. A great way to practice breaking grabs is to utilize Jin in training mode. Jin has access to 3 different grabs, each requiring a different button to break. This is a skill you'll build up slowly. It is more important to hit the correct button to solidify the correct response, rather than try and be quick with any random button. Speaking of throws, some characters have grabs which transition into more grabs, and then possibly even more. A notorious example of this is King's rolling death cradle. See, he does his stance where he enters a wave dash and then does a little grab. He can then choose a select series of buttons that will open up a pathway to a new grab. Think of it like a flowchart, where if he clicks one series of buttons, he'll get one grab, but if he clicks another series of buttons, he'll get a second grab. What you as a grappled person must do is absolutely mash either 1, 2, or 1+2. Unfortunately, there's only one correct answer to break King's throws. Whilst I do recommend you mash something, it's much better in the long term to recognize the animation and try and mash the correct button. Now, if the King player fails to input the correct series of buttons, he'll simply let go during the middle of the chain throw. When in doubt, mash 1+2 against a King player, and if you see this animation, just spam 2. In Tekken, it's more important to avoid moves rather than try and block everything that comes your way. Defending is very difficult, and whilst it's a vital skill to learn, movement is key. A lot of moves may seem pretty overpowered when you confine it to a 2-dimensional plane, but if you implement a quick sidestep here or there and try to avoid the attack altogether, this will create a whiff for the enemy, and a whiff is when the enemy hits nothing and is trapped in the ending lag. You can get extremely far in Tekken by backdashing once or twice when the opponent is near and creating this whiff. Tekken is notorious for being quite difficult to move properly with, so I would recommend practicing how to move around on an infinite stage whenever you're feeling quite rigid. A key movement option to learn is the Korean backdash. What this term represents is cancelling your backdash with a down back input, leaving you to only have to input one extra back for the second backdash. You can do a simpler input by using a backdash and then rolling your inputs from down to down back, then adding a supplementary back input. Sadly, this technique does not work for all characters, as some of them have a sway stance which you'll enter instead of going into your backdash. Along with throw breaking, this technique is vital to learn long term. You should practice this every time you play, but it should be utilised with purpose. Normally, the fastest move your character has is the generic 1 jab. This jab is 10 frames. What that means is it takes 10 frames for the move to be able to activate and connect with your opponent. If you were to have 2 characters utilize their 10 frame move at the exact same time, they would both also get hit at the exact same time. This is known as a trade. If someone uses an 11 frame move and another person uses a 10 frame move at the exact same time, as you would imagine, the 10 frame move would land and interrupt the opponent first. This is also known as a counter hit. It becomes slightly more complicated when you have frame advantage or frame disadvantage. Certain moves will give you plus frames, putting you in the advantaged state. If you land your generic one jab on a blocking opponent, you will be able to act one frame faster than your opponent. Since you're one frame ahead of your opponent, if you were both to do the 10 frame move as soon as you could act, the person who was +1 would be able to strike the opponent first. Alternatively, if your moves have led you to be in minus frames, such as your opponent blocking a regular mid, you will be in the disadvantaged state. Your opponent then may act before you. It is a lot of time and effort to view your character's frame data, as moves have different frames depending on if they landed or if they were blocked, and then some have different frames again depending if you landed a counter hit. So now that we have an idea of what frames are, the next step is punishment. Certain moves put your character in such a disadvantageous state that you are unsafe. -10 is the initial point for unsafe moves. Again, there are some outliers. If your opponent is -10, you are able to land your generic one jab before they are even allowed to block. The more negative frames a move leaves you on, the more options open up for your opponent to start punishing you for it. This is where you start hearing the terms 10 frame punish, 12 frame punish, launchable, etc. A 12 frame punisher is a move that for your character is generally implemented when your opponent utilizes a move that is -12. Meaning you can land this move on your opponent no matter what, as long as you are within range. If something is launch punishable, it normally means that it's -15 frames, meaning most of the cast has the ability to start their juggle combo. Try challenging your opponents with your quickest and safest moves, and then ramp up the punishment when something works. Sometimes you may have a faster move or be ahead in frames where your attack should connect but somehow misses your opponent. You may have Tekken's crush system to thank there. Some moves have the ability to crush a category of attacks, making them invincible for a specific duration. One notable example is the hop kick. When you use a hop kick, you are immune to low attacks as you are in the air. Different moves have different crush properties, so play around and see what your character has to offer. Unfortunately, it can be quite difficult to perceive if your attack is crushing a category or if it simply has an evasive hitbox. If you have someone like Lily, she hooks her hand to the right where Lee's head is to his left, and she actually perfectly connects her hand to his head, and this hits every single time. Now, I don't know every property of every move in this game, but I'm pretty sure you cannot crush mids. If I'm wrong, please let me know. I'm curious to see if there is actually one. It can be quite deceiving in Tekken to check whether or not your string of moves is actually a true combo. When you first open training mode, you may throw out a series of moves that will tell you it's a combo. This may actually not be a true combo though. To test if a combo is true, select the second action to guard all. This will enable the practice dummy to block whenever they're able to, allowing you to check the legitimacy of your combo. In Tekken, there are very few extended combos like you would find in other games. Instead, we have juggles. To begin a juggle, you must launch your opponent. Normally this is done with a hop kick or a down forward 2. This will put your opponent into an airborne state. You can then hit them several times, with each hit becoming weaker and sending the opponent further and further away. You may also utilize the screw attack to bounce the opponent up, allowing you to catch up to them and land some bigger hits. You can only bounce them once with the screw attack though, as supplementary screw attacks will allow them to start teching. There are a few goals you should think about when you perform a juggle. These are doing as much damage as possible, pushing them as far as you can to a wall, or if you have no walls, or maybe you can't reach the wall, set up your okazeme. Certain moves, most of them being screw attacks, will splat your opponent onto the wall. There are two main versions of the wall splat, a high wall splat and a low wall splat. You can only do a certain amount of moves onto the opponent while they're stuck on the wall before they start sliding down and are able to recover. Speaking of walls, if you click back and then up back, your character will do a wall jump. Sometimes your wall jump will just get you out of there, and other times you'll attack. If you juggle your opponent to the wall, all moves bar a few will splat them automatically. This will allow you to begin your wall combo. Certain arenas have breakable walls, which will daze the opponent. Some also have balconies and other fun things. Now, specific to the temple stage, you can actually put your opponent through the ground with floor break moves. You have to see what moves of your character actually puts them through the floor. Sometimes they have to be on an airborne opponent, so just mess around and maybe look up online and see what people have to say.